Living in a highly urbanized country such as South Korea, commuting on a public transportation is an inevitable part of our daily life. So crowded and public they are, we tend to disregard them as a place of potential paranormal sightings, but apparently they are. After all, accidents are not uncommon, and considering how many different people pass through them with their own energies and stories, I think it really isn't a big surprise. Today we are taking a look at the stories of paranormal sightings at commuter trains and buses and their stations, which may make you look around from a different perspective next time you are commuting. 5 allegedly true stories from Korea about ghosts on public transportations. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. This happened just yesterday evening. I was on the way out by town shuttle bus. It was pretty empty, and the only other passenger was a guy, probably in his 20s, and on the opposite row of seats. The driver stopped at each stop 3 times and opened the exit door, even though there was nobody at the stops, and neither I nor the other passenger had pushed the stop buzzer. Driver stopped the bus yet again at the next stop, and this time he shouted with a hint of annoyance, "Are you getting off?" Again, neither I nor the other passenger gave him any sign that we were getting off. Driver huffed and started the bus again, saying, "Oi, mister, at least hold on to a handle or something. Don't just stand in the middle." As I said, the only 2 passengers, including me, were sitting down all the while. I was so creeped out that I got off the bus and walked the rest of the journey. What the heck was the driver seeing? I'm a community shuttle bus driver. You may have seen buses running with all the lights and signs off. They are the buses returning to its designated depot after the day's run. One day in mid-March, I had to drive back to the depot after a long day's work. Before I started, I checked around to make sure every passenger was off and to tidy up. Everything was clear, so I turned interior lights and signs off and was about to set off. As my habit goes, I looked at the rear view mirror. I saw a woman sitting on the seat on the 3rd row, looking out of the window. I stopped the bus. I did make sure everyone's off. I turned the light back on and looked back. Empty. Maybe I was wrong? Again turned the lights off and sat back at the driver's. She was there again. Light back on, looked back, only to find it empty. I got more irritated. Couldn't deal with it after a long day's work. I willfully avoided looking at the mirror again and started my way. The motorway was almost empty in the quiet little town at night, but I somehow dared not speed up. I wasn't quite sure if I was really fit. As I slowed down at a sharp curve, I couldn't resist looking at the rearview mirror again. She was there, at the same seat and in the same posture. This couldn't be a mistake. My breath started to run faster. I noticed as the bus tumbled, the road in the small town was rough. Her body also moved just as a real human body would. I was sweating cold. Had a few dangerous moments too, as my focus now was on the rear view mirror. I breathed deep and mentally slapped myself. Hold yourself together. If it was a real person, I ought just apologize and pay her taxi fee at the depot. If it were a ghost, well, what worse could happen than she'd trick me to a fatal accident? I shifted all my focus on driving. It was a mental escape, so to say. Then the stop buzzer rang, which startled me so much that I stepped on the brake hard. It was my luck there wasn't any other cars around. I was out of my mind and breathing hard on the steering wheel. I could sense her approaching me. On the windshield, I saw the blurred reflection of a person standing next to me. I felt her bending down to my ear. She whispered something. I didn't understand a word of what she said at the time, as I wasn't myself, and yet I was calming down. I opened the door, sensed she getting off, closed the door, and resumed my journey. I don't know if my memory was warped or not, but I think what she said to me in a sad-sounding whisper was, "Don't be so scared. I'm sorry." She looked like any ordinary young woman. If it was that she had to meet an untimely death, I pray from my heart that she'd rest in peace wherever she is now. I was a bit of a troubled child as a teenager. I failed to enter the high school near home and had to attend another about 10 minutes away by metro. Problem was, because it was almost at the end of the branch, once missed a train, one had to wait good 30 to 40 minutes for the next one. The last train I had to catch if I wanted to avoid getting late for school was at 7:10, but I was then hooked up with an online game, and after a long night of gaming, more often than not, I failed to get up on time. It was another morning of such. In fact, it was well past 9:30. I was still tired at that hour, and was dozing in and out, standing on the edge of the empty platform, well past the usual morning rush hour. And then the announcement of the train approaching startled me out of my snooze, and I opened my eyes. A train ran past right in front of me, almost touching my nose. I hurriedly stepped back and saw several dark, shadowy arms poking out of the side of the train as if to snatch and pull me in. God, I almost pissed myself. I could have been easily in the headline of a newspaper. A high school student snoozed to his death, fallen from the platform, or something like that. Problem is, I did see those shadowy hands several more times afterwards. Now I always stay well away from the edge of the platform when I wait for trains. A friend told me this story. He for a time worked for the metro in Busan City, specifically in Busan Museum of Art station on line number 2. One day he was on the platform looking around to keep everything in check, and saw a woman and a little child in black was standing on one end of the platform, hand in hand. They didn't move or talk, but blankly gazing the opposite platform. It was late in the day, and the station was virtually empty, including the benches on the platform. He just briefly thought, why aren't they rather sitting on the bench till the next train comes? After that, he spent most of the rest of his shift in the control room, as it was a quiet hour, and only shortly before the end of the shift he went out to the platform for one last patrol. And there, at the same spot, were still standing the woman and the child from earlier, exactly frozen in the same position. It spooked him, but decided to approach them to make sure everything was okay with them. As he walked towards them, he radioed his boss in the control room. "Mr. Kim, it's Hyunchul here. Are you looking at the CCTV now?"
"Yeah, I am. I see you on the camera 1. What are you doing there all alone?"
"Do you perhaps see a woman and a child in the same angle?"
"What woman? I don't see anybody else but you."
My friend could not say anything more. Should he yell out, "There are ghosts here?" he feared the woman and child would notice him and even follow him. He made up a quick excuse and finished the radio. And all the while, the woman and child were still there. He was so scared that he could not move, and only the sight of a drunken passenger stumbling down the stairs for the last train of the day woke him up from the frozen state. The last train then rolled into the platform, and he saw the woman and the child floating into the carriage. Their heads then turned 180 degrees and grinned at him as the train pulled off. In 1996, I was a sophomore. To commute to my university in a different city, I either had to take a metro train or an express bus. My preference was the bus because it took less time. My major called for various assignments and group projects, and by the time I was done, it was usually the last bus of the day I could take back home. It was one such a day. Weather was miserable, cold and wet, and I was sitting at my usual favorite seat and dozing away with my head leaning against the window. And then I woke up startled. Nothing? Bus was soundly running as it should, and all the other passengers didn't seem anyway alarmed or surprised. I browsed through the newspaper next day, but there was no report of crash on the route of my express bus. Several days passed. It was another rainy night, and another dozing away on the last bus. It was earth-shatteringly loud, and I jumped up with a scream. But once again, the bus was running without any sign of trouble. Since then on, whenever I took the bus on a rainy day, I heard a loud crashing noise. As I got used to it, I also noticed it happening at the same spot on the journey route. I was so creeped that for a while I chose metro instead. But one day I met an unexpected downpour. I had no umbrella, and to avoid a significant distance to walk to the metro station, I had to choose the express bus instead. A long, monotonous ride on the late-night bus would be usually a lullaby to my tired self, but that day I stayed alert because I was expecting the crashing noise. And just as I expected, I quickly looked out of the window to see if there was anything I was missing, and saw a sign I hadn't noticed earlier. Accident black spot. While I was processing what I just saw, a man sitting in front of me woke up from his slumber with a startle. What? Have we crushed something?" he said. He was clearly confused to find nothing had happened. just like I was when I first heard the noise. But he was bolder than I, and he asked around other passengers if they hadn't heard the crash. It was really loud. There must have been a big accident. But nobody really engaged with him. I thought to tell him I heard the same thing, but I felt too shy. The bus arrived at the destination, and passengers started getting off. And before that guy got off, the driver stopped him and said, "I didn't say anything earlier because I didn't want to alert the others, but some people occasionally hear crashing noise at the spot." So, it wasn't just me after all. The sound of the crash was terrifyingly wild. Anybody involved in it would have been most likely be killed. Could it be an accident in the past at that black spot somehow repeating itself every rainy day? I just decided to keep using the bus. Mysterious, but harmless, I thought. One grey day, it kept dry, but sky was low. I hopped on the last bus of the day as usual, and found my usual favorite seat taken by a young woman. Well, I took a different seat and looked around the bus settling down. Oh, the woman wasn't there anymore. I looked backside and around to see if she had moved her seat, but she was gone. Odd, but whatever. An hour later, the bus arrived at my destination. As I was getting off, I unwittingly looked back in the bus. And there, on my usual favorite seat, was the young woman again. I gasped. The woman was looking at me with a faint smile. I was seized by the animalistic fright and ran away. I stopped using the express bus ever since. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I too used to commute on impossibly crowded metro trains when I was a regular office worker, being squeezed, tossed, and turned around when I was already exhausted didn't really bring out the best side of me, I must say. If we can theorize that some paranormal phenomenon is the manifestation of accumulated negative energies and anxieties, I must agree that our everyday buses, trains, and stations are not short of them. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving my videos thumbs up and comments, and sharing them with others. It really helps this little channel grow. Until the next, have a wonderful week and take care.